This is I do, you do answers for adding and subtracting fractions. First problem is 4/9 plus 2/5. To review what we have to do for addition and subtraction of fractions, you must be in a common denominator. In other words, the bottoms of your fractions have to match. To do that, whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So if you change the bottom, you have to change the top. That's one thing people forget sometimes. So whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. Then you are ready to add or subtract the numerators and leave the bottom as that new common denominator. And then, of course, your last step in all fraction problems is simplify. So let's do that on this problem. I look at 9 and 5, and I need where they match up. They match up at 45, so I'm going to be working in 45ths here. I should have made this a little bit larger, I guess. Whatever I did to the bottom, I do to the top. So on this one, I took it times 5 to get it to be 45, and I take the top times 5 to make it into a 20. On this one, I took it times a 9 to get it to be 45, so I need to take it times 9 to make it 18. We've done common denominator. Now we're ready to add or subtract the tops and leave the bottoms. So we add the numerators, since we're in addition. 20 plus 18 is 38, and we leave the bottom alone as 45ths. And we have our answer of 38/45. The next one has some negatives in it, so I'm going to go ahead and put my box down here and figure the negative out first, the negative rule. Leave, change opposite, puts both those on the same team, so we're going to be adding and using that same sign. So this is really an addition problem with negative as my answer, so I'm going to write them up and down just because that allows me to show it a little bit better. I'm going to add them. Notice I'm using their absolute values because I've already got whether it's positive or negative. I already have whether we're adding or subtracting. Now I'm going to a common denominator of 15. Again, whatever we did at the bottom, like times 5, we do to the top, times 5. And times 3, so times 3. And now we're done with these. Don't let them confuse you anymore. So now remember we're adding these because they're on the same team. So we add the tops, leave the bottoms. Add the numerators, leave the denominator alone. Add your whole numbers. 4 and 2 is 6. Move it over because it's not 6 and 13/15. It's negative 6 and 13/15. Here we have a subtraction problem. So I'm going to go ahead and do leave, change, opposite. They have different signs, so I'm going to subtract sign of the larger, so this will be positive. I need to put the larger absolute value on top when I go to subtract these. Now I'm going to a common denominator, so I'm looking at 4 and 5 and realizing they match at 20. This one you took times 5, so you take the top times 5 and it becomes 5. This one you took times 4, so you take the top times 4 and it becomes 12. Now that's where you got to be careful because you need to borrow. You can't subtract going up. We're going down on this problem. And if you have 5 pieces and want to subtract 12, you can't do it. So we borrow. Everybody, how many pieces did I borrow? If you're in my class, you've heard me say that many, many times. And you always borrow what you're in. We happen to be in 20ths, so I borrowed a whole number in the form of 20 20ths. Now the shortcut is you borrowed that many. You already had that many, so add them together and you have 25 20ths. 5 that you had and 20 that you borrowed. So my new number is 25 20ths. Now I can subtract. 25 minus 12 is 13. Remember, we don't change the bottom. They're in 20ths. That's the size pieces that we're talking about. And 8 minus 2 is 6. Your answer is 6 and 13 20ths. This problem has negatives in it, so I'm going to go ahead and do my negative rule first. It's addition. They're on the same team, so I'm going to add and use that same sign. It's going to be negative. So let me go ahead and use their absolute values. 8 and 2/3 plus 6 and 3/8. Find my common denominator for 3 and 8, which is 24. Whatever you did at the bottom, you do to the top. So times 8 and times 8. Times 3 and times 3. Now we're ready to add the top since we're doing an addition problem now. 25 pieces. Remember the bottom is just like a label. They're 24ths. And 8 plus 6 is 14. The only problem is this is a little bit mixed and a little bit improper, so it's mixed up. So we changed the improper part by dividing 25 by 24. It goes in there once with one remainder, so that's one whole and one remainder out of 24. Then the 1 goes with the 15 because it's a whole number, and we call that 15 with 1 remainder out of 24, and we have to remember it's negative. So negative 15 and 1/24. Once again, I see negatives here, so I'm going to go ahead and do my negative part, leave, change, opposite, which puts them on different teams, so I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to use the sign of the larger absolute value. It's going to be negative. Remember, when you write this down, you need to have the larger absolute value on top. Because if you had 5 minus 7, we're not doing that. We'd be doing leave, change, opposite, which is what we just did. So now we're in absolute value. So to find the difference, you take the big minus the little. You have to go to common denominator. So for 2 and 7, it's 14. If you took it times 7, then you have to take it times 7 again up here. If you took it times 2, then you have to take it times 2 here. And now I'm done with this stuff, so don't let it confuse you. You're ready to subtract, except you have 7, and you want to take away 10. So think about what we talked a moment ago about. How many did I just borrow? Last time I borrowed, I think it was 20. This time I'm in 14th, so I borrowed a whole in the form of 14 14ths. I had 7, I borrowed 14. When I add them together, I have 21 pieces. That's my new numerator. And now 21 minus 10 is 11 pieces. The bottom is 14. Remember, it's just like a label. And 6 minus 5 is 1. So our answer is negative 1 and 11/14.